No, we have not. We're going to start right now.
Okay,
All
but
right.
before you do,
Oh, wait.
oh,
I just
okay, never
finished.
mind. We're in.
You know
Here we
what?
are.
Send me. Do you know where the comments are?
I
Send
the
send me a comment
private
if you need
chat
to tell me. Yes, a private chat. Yeah,
chat
send
with
me a
everyone in
comment
the
there.
studio. Okay.
Hey, friends. We are live with Stephanie Winn right now. We're having a really fun start to this. We're just kind of bumbling in, but we are going to be having a really great discussion. I want to introduce Stephanie. So Stephanie is a licensed therapist. She is, if you guys know her from Twitter, she is, where did I just put that? Oh my gosh, I
Some
just lost it
therapist.
again. She is
I'm just
some
some
therapist.
therapist.
She is some therapist on Twitter. She is some therapist on YouTube. She is the associate producer and doing all of the publicity for the documentary Affirmation Generation. She has a Substack or a blog, rather. She does all kinds of things, and she has been speaking out as a mental health professional on this issue for the last year. She has been working with D-Trans and doing documenting with them, doing some back and forth with them, writing letters, and really providing a support system and also educating the public on this issue. So I'm really happy to have her here today. And what I thought is I would like to start with a trailer for the film for those of you who may not have seen it. Okay, so I'm going to put that up right now, and we are going to watch the trailer of the film. It is a great film. If you have not yet seen it today, please do go out and see it.
The audio doesn't seem to be working properly. Hey, Amy.
Yeah, can you hear?
The audio is not coming across properly.
Oh no. Hold on. Hold on. Sorry about that. Let me try one thing. Oh, I see why. Hold on. It did this the other day. I don't understand why it did this. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, let's try this one more time. So tell me, do you hear this? Clause, which is,
Yes.
being born in the wrong body, and that there's one treatment, which is transition, and you don't ask questions. This is the only way to go. There are some people who do benefit from transition, but there's some people who are harmed from transition. The therapist said I'm automatically transgender, and she had my letter to transition right away after my first session with her.
Autism, childhood sexual abuse, internalized homophobia, internalized misogyny. There's just so many reasons that people transition and end up later regretting it.
It seems like all of this is based on the fear that if you don't affirm a child's identity right away, they're going to be at a high risk of suicide.
It's just not true. And in fact, those who had transitioned had suicide rates 19 times higher than population matched controls.
These vulnerable people were treated incredibly badly by the professionals.
I saw one of those therapists for probably about an hour, and he wrote a letter recommending testosterone for me. I will never be able to breastfeed.
Like I said, I have to now live with what I've done.
That's what I hear. I have ruined my life. I had a perfectly good body, and now it's ruined.
We're rushing to make a permanent medical transformation.
It's not right to medicalize perfectly healthy bodies and make them sicker.
It's not a trans, gay, straight issue.
This is going to harm lesbian, gay, bisexual kids because they're being pushed down a medical path rather than accepting who they are.
It's trying to protect them from being sterilized.
they're selling a product and they do a really, really good job. And young people, they're buying it. They're just buying it.
Puberty blockers followed by cross-sex hormones. The fact they're being offered outside of clinical trials, despite the fact there's so much unknown about long-term risk, is a scandal in and of itself.
I turned to professionals, doctors, and I was not helped. I was just ushered along, very mindlessly. And I had permanent damage because of it.
Yay. Okay. So great. A really great film for those who haven't seen it yet. I want to say that there is going to be a screening that we're going to be having live in Austin, Texas on April the 21st. I'm going to be there. Stephanie is going to be there. Is anyone else from the film going to be there?
I don't believe anyone else from our film is going to be there. I think Jennifer Law is going to be there because we're also
Jennifer
screening the
Law is gonna be
Detransition Diaries.
Diaries, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll be there for your panel the day before.
Yeah.
And as far as live screenings go, we're also doing a live screening in Portland for D-Trans Awareness Day this Sunday. Leslie Elliott is organizing one in Seattle. And a whole bunch of people are organizing one in Los Angeles. So if you're not doing anything this Sunday for D-Trans Awareness Day already, feel free to reach out to me for information about any of those events. You do have to know someone who can vouch for you. We are not letting just anybody into these events, and we have our security plans in place.
But that is really useful.
Yeah.
Well, that's so great. And yes, I see in the comments a lot of people, happy International Women's Day, everyone. Happy International Women's Day, Stephanie.
Happy Women's Day, my fellow adult human female.
I'm so glad to be talking to you on Women's Day. I loved this film so much, and I thought that it brought together so many experts. I think more experts than a lot of films that I've seen on this issue, and so many diverse mental health professionals speaking out. I feel like that was amazing to see. We usually, I think the other films that I've seen, Matt Walsh's film and Tucker's film and some other films that are out there, you see maybe one mental health professional. So this was a really, really wonderful collection of different professionals speaking out on this.
Yeah, it was really such an honor to be a part of it. I'm really proud of the work that our producers put into it. It shows. I mean, it's been such a labor of love for them, and I'm really honored to be a part of it and honored that they've chosen me as their spokesperson.
Yeah, thank you. The film is called, for everyone, it's called Affirmation Generation, and I will put up a link. I'll put up a Vimeo link in just a moment. It is on Vimeo. It was momentarily taken down, but it is back up. Of course, as much as we do these projects, as much as we have successes, we have people who are trying to stop us from telling our stories. But the more that we create these kind of films, the more that we put this work out there, I think the less they are going to be able to disrupt our telling of these stories.
Yeah, and that was a real victory moment, Of course, it was kind of predictable in a way, right? That after 3 days and 19,000 views on Vimeo, a bunch of activists pressured Vimeo to take it down. But then there was an equal amount of uprising from our end of people petitioning Vimeo to put it back up. And Vimeo reviewed it and found that it did not, in fact, violate their guidelines. So that was a victory for Team Reality.
I'm so glad. So tell me about your experience making this. How many times did they speak to you? Did they direct you, or did you get to really just riff on what you wanted to say and what your thoughts were?
Yeah, so my role in the film really just came from a couple of different interviews that we did online. And since then, we have actually refilmed those portions for a later version of the film that will come out, because what's been released now is the the early access, that's for, our target population that we really want this to reach: parents, teachers, doctors, therapists, and lawmakers. But, we hope for this film to eventually reach exponentially more people. And so, when my role became kind of elevated to the media representative, I did want to refilm those portions from like the Zoom level quality of the calls. And so we've done a local refilming, and you haven't seen the updated version yet. But the producers are so great to work with. They really just want everyone to share their story, and they bring it out. And so I spoke very freely. They asked me some questions. And that's part of why I agreed to do this role. I'm a very independent person. I'm generally quite hesitant to work with other people, but our producers are so great. They really treat all of our participants with so much respect and freedom.
For those who don't yet know, and I know a little bit about your story, but I would love to kind of hear your, I guess, transition, how you went from, working in your field, seeing these issues come up in young people, and going up from sort of grappling with it to speaking out on it.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a therapist for 10 years, or 11 if you count the last year of grad school when I was in practicum. Oh, it's cool. It's cool being able to see the comments pop up on the screen. Mary Rose says it's a beautiful film. I think that's going to be distracting, but worthwhile anyway. So I've been a therapist for 10 or 11 years, and I've only recently been thinking and talking more about the first time I ever encountered an ethical conflict over this issue. So the first time I encountered people talking about this was in actually what I'm going to talk about is after grad school, but just to sort of preface it, in grad school we had one really woke classmate who wanted us all to call ourselves cis. And I remember at the time instinctively how that felt. It felt like it felt burdensome, and it felt like being nudged out, like there's a qualifier on my being a woman, but I don't think I had the words for that at the time. But also grad school wasn't dominated by that perspective at the time. This was 2010 to 2013. Now I think people who think like that are sort of everywhere in these grad programs, and they're running the programs. But it was in my first job that I encountered the first real ethical dilemma, which was I was helping to run a residential facility for 18 to 24-year-olds with severe mental illness who needed a post-hospitalization 24/7 step-down facility. So they weren't locked down. They had freedom, but they were living there, and we were managing we didn't prescribe their medications, but we helped them take their meds and helped them figure out what they were going to cook for dinner and all that kind of stuff. And it was a very stressful job in a really under-resourced community mental health setting with a highly traumatized, high-needs population. And the first time I encountered an ethical conflict was when we had a young man who really didn't present as if he was trying to pass as female at all. And he, to make matters more complicated, had, I don't know if it was schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, but he had some kind of psychotic disorder. He was actively delusional and hallucinating in a number of ways. And he identified as a trans woman. And our director insisted that he be placed in a female room. And so
was this just two in a room?
For what I recall is that it was the two of them. We had most of our rooms fit 2 people, but there was one room that fit 3. It's possible that he was with 2 females. Maybe our director thought, but
it's tight quarters.
Yeah, and either the only female or one of the 2 females he was placed with, because I can't remember which, was, as with many of our residents, somebody who had a history of molestation, and she ran away from the facility. And who could blame her? I probably would have done the same. How could you sleep at night knowing that there's a large, intimidating, delusional male in the room? So that definitely didn't sit well at the time.
Yeah.
But then it just wasn't on my radar for a while.
Can I go back for a second? What was the director's response, or did any other of the did you all talk about it at the time?
I wish I could remember more. this was almost 10 years ago, and
Yeah, sure.
I remember and I do remember actually so each resident was assigned a personal counselor who was a little bit more involved in their care. And so at any given time I had like 2 or 3 residents who I worked with more one-on-one. And I was not the personal counselor for either of these residents. But I remember that the personal counselor for the woman in this situation was concerned about her. And she was a lesbian. Not that necessarily makes a difference, but she was a woman who loves other women, and she was concerned for her female client. And I remember it being like, I remember the director being kind of like, yeah, well, it's definitely like not ideal, but this is kind of what we have to do. And I remember all of us talking about the conflict, but it wasn't such a heated, polarized, pressurized, politicized issue back then as it is today. I think at the time everyone was able to acknowledge that it was a conflict. And if I have any regrets, and it's so long ago, I don't really have any regrets. It was such a different time in life. But if I could go back and advise myself how to handle it differently, I would probably say, take this very seriously and really like push for there to be some other kind of solution. You can't, just because. But I think I was like young and inexperienced and intimidated by the other staff.
Well, and it's curious. What's curious to me, I guess, is that, even at a time when it wasn't yet so saturated in the culture, somewhere this was already, this was the beginning. This was, an initiation into it. And, I think that, there's a lot of us that are much better educated, and maybe if you had known what you know now, you would have pushed back. But on the other hand, it's very interesting to see how, and I remember this just for myself, not really grasping how very dangerous it was. I remember sort of a similar situation, not mental health wise, but when I was teaching and feeling like, well, I personally don't agree, I personally don't agree, and I personally don't like the direction this is heading, but not yet fighting it, not yet seeing how very bad it was, how very dangerous it was.
How important, how this was a situation in which the ethical thing to do involves risking your reputation or having conflict with colleagues, which, when you're younger in your career, you don't feel like you can afford that. That was the first time I ever experienced an ethical dilemma over this issue, but I wasn't really in a decision-making capacity. And there were a lot of confounding variables. I mean, maybe part of why I didn't speak up, just thinking about it, is that like there were so many aspects of that facility that were so far from ideal that like I would not trade places with any of the residents. Doesn't matter what kind of room they're sharing with who, So it's like, oh, they're just one more thing. Now you have to sleep with a man in the room, like.
Yeah.
But after that, like I had I worked for a Native American community mental health clinic with foster youth and families, but also couples and adolescents. Not all of our clients were Native American. We took Medicaid, so while we tried to focus on the Native American community, we also were just like a community mental health clinic. I had mixed experiences there, but this issue wasn't on the radar all that much.
Yeah.
And then I worked for a group practice for 4 years before I went into private practice in 2020. So the group practice was 2016 to 2020, and that's when, the exponential growth curve was really starting to show. And to make matters more complicated, during a particular transition during my time there, when I was moving from working at one of our locations to a different location, I befriended a member of the staff who was also like me, kind of on the fringes. I already felt like I didn't fit in there, and she was somebody who also kind of didn't fit in. She was very sex positive. She was polyamorous. She worked with polyamorous couples. And at the time, I was like all about that. I had cultural competency training in working with non-monogamous couples and thruples. And so I I liked that she liked me, and I wanted to make her happy.
Yeah.
And I was going through some difficult stuff in my life that I felt ashamed of with regard to how other colleagues might perceive me. So the fact that I had a good relationship with her, I felt like I really needed to treat that relationship well during the few months that we had together because she was moving out of state. And so she kind of formed an impression of me that I was going to be the perfect therapist for all of her trans clients because
wow.
she was the trans affirming therapist. And
Wow.
And I don't remember whether this happened before or after, or if it was around the same time as I went to the training in gender affirming care, which was presented to us employees of this company as like, this is the new model and it's what we want you all to understand. It's kind of just the new standard, and you should go if you work with young people. You should go if at all possible. And that's where I was first exposed to this kind of activist-led training where you're not actually learning anything about the root causes of gender dysphoria or holistic ways of thinking about it. You're not really being given anything that draws on anything else you know about psychology. Instead, there's just this whole new thing being imposed. It's like, did you know that puberty, going through the wrong sex puberty, causes a tremendous amount of distress in these poor young people who are born in the wrong body, and if you can save them from that, you are saving lives. So here's your new role. Don't be gatekeepers, be green light people through the system so they can get those life-saving puberty blockers. And I mean, that was kind of the tone of the training. And
wow.
And at the time, it was like, again, the social pressures that keep people silent. Like, I was so afraid of my colleagues thinking less of me. And, you're in the room and everyone is just sort of smiling and nodding politely and deferentially. And then every now and then someone pushes back, but like, they're not, treated with a whole lot of respect. And I thought, here's a way I can be a good person, right? So it's like, I have this friendship with this therapist that I want to impress, and I have this training that I've gone to, and I don't want to stick out. And so I end up becoming like one of the most like far left therapists within the organization. I mean, I remember when they tried to update their policies for how we listed people in the system, if they wanted to change their pronouns or whatever. And I actually sent back the form corrected. I was like, actually, the correct term is sex assigned at birth. I was like scribbling things out, like trying to, yeah, because I was trying to do a good job, and I wanted, like, and so it's just funny when people call me right wing. It's like, I saw this stuff.
In a sense, you're like this like therapy whistleblower. Like you're blowing the whistle on these trainings, and it's crazy to me because I see it in the mental health field, but I see it in education as well, where at one time we trained counselors or therapists for this very specific role. Same with teachers. And now both of those roles are basically being activists within the field. Like you're meant to be an activist within the field. And that's this shocking part. Like that neutrality thing that you were speaking of, that just then is blown out of the window.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of our kind of traditional knowledge that's being erased here because the drive to be an activist, the drive to bring your personal politics into your therapy is normally, historically, something that we would be taught to recognize as a countertransference issue.
Yeah, I know. You wouldn't do it.
So I saw this stuff in action. I was practicing it, and I thank God that I never went to the next level training because there was this kind of message that they wanted people to go to the next level training where you learned to write the WPATH letters. And I remember at the time not wanting to go and feeling like that made me bad or wrong or lazy somehow. Like, I think there was something about like World Professional Association for Transgender Health Standards of Care 7. That sounds really official. That sounds like a lot of reading. I think there was a part of me that was like, that sounds like too much to study. Like, I don't want to learn this whole procedure. Like, I think that's what I thought my resistance was at the time, but now I see in retrospect also that that resistance was my whole body saying like, no, don't go further down this path. This is, um, and I remember feeling so weird about it when I was in that position where I was working with someone who identified as trans and they wanted me to find someone to write one of those letters for them. And I did refer out for that a couple of times.
Wow.
But
You know,
mostly I
I'm
saw people in like post transition or post mastectomies and stuff like that, but I did see a few people through the process. And and it was it was the process of working with trans identified people for probably 5 years, from about 2016 to even into the first year of my private practice to 2021. That well, no, more like 2020. It was pretty early on in my prep. I don't know. There was a weird phase there. I can't get too into specifics, but it was working with them and noticing how much this approach did not align with anything else I knew about what it was to provide good therapy, and noticing that I wasn't helping people get better, and then it felt like we couldn't talk about the elephant in the room, and and witnessing people go through it and thinking along the way like there's something that really doesn't feel right to me about this, and I went through various stages of shock, like, wow, is this really what this young person is planning on doing, or things not adding up. And there were times I saw a clear correlation, like a very 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 pretty girl with a lot of trauma, and including sexual trauma, like suddenly deciding that she's not a girl anymore. Like things like that where you're like, oh, this is definitely about what she's been through, like.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you saw this in the field, but a former friend of mine, we're not close anymore. I saw him. He is a therapist, and I saw him make, in a sense, a transition. And I don't know if you noticed this within your colleagues, but he did go down that path. He did go down the W path and the being able to do that. And he eventually worked solely with clients who were considering themselves trans, or gender questioning, all of the DSM terms. But I saw him go through a process in what I felt like, at first, I knew him as a therapist, which I thought he had a practice that was very professional. And as I saw him go down this path, I saw that his self-perception transitioned from being a therapist to being really a savior. Like, he saw himself as saving people, as saving these kids. I heard him say that word. I've saved so many people. And because I was raised in a fundamentalist religious household, it triggered something really disturbing in me, because I was like, that's not the language of a mental health professional. That's not how you should be talking about your clients. And he's kind of an extreme person, so I don't know if you yourself have seen anything that extreme, but I felt very concerned about the dynamic that he was having with his clients at that point.
Absolutely. And it's like, and this is why, going back to what I was saying earlier, like the classical trading in the importance of understanding what's going on with our countertransference. And so I had an interesting experience recently. I don't know if you saw my testimony against Oregon House Bill 2458.
I'm so glad you did that. I got so sick that day. I wanted to live stream it, and I was gonna do it from Zoom and put you guys on the live stream, and I just,
oh wow. Oh, that would
I
be
was
cool.
I was out for 3 days. I did it with the Washington State one, and I'll, if I know that you're doing it again, I'll do the same thing. But yeah, tell us about that.
So, this was quite an interesting moment in my life. I wanted to have that experience of actually physically driving down there, with Camille and Elise, and because all these years of being stuck inside on the computer, everything being online, I was just like, no, I need to feel this is real life happening.
Yeah.
But I underestimated the stress toll it would take on my body to be in a room with all of these activists sitting there waiting for my turn to come up. They were talking about other bills before it was even our turn, and my heart was pounding and my stomach was in knots. My stomach was in knots for days afterward. Now I understand where that saying comes from. I actually feel like my stomach twisted up like a pretzel. But
you can do it online. You can Zoom in.
Next time, maybe I will. Now I know what it's like to testify in court. But and Camille was actually calming me down. It's like, this is about her trauma, but I was holding her hand and typing notes to her, oh my God, I feel so sick. Camille's done this before. But anyway, I wanted to have that experience, and then it came time for our bill to be addressed. And the representative that I work with, Representative Ed Deal, who's been great, told me originally that he was going to try to get the opposition to come up first, but as it was, the support went first, and so because there were so many people to testify, no, I was against. I'm opposition. Okay,
yeah.
So because there were so many people there to testify, the way that the representatives have worked it out is they picked their lead expert witnesses to go up first and get the priority time.
Good.
And so I was part of the expert witnesses in opposition. And what I did not know going into this, but is not surprising, is one of the first people to go up in support as an expert witness in support of this bill was a former teacher of mine. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I did a 30-hour training with her in how to provide clinical supervision. It's part of why I legally am qualified to supervise interns, although I'm not currently doing that as part of my practice. I have way too much else going on, and it is too tricky of a time to take on that responsibility.
Yeah.
But a few years ago, as soon as I was had been in the field long enough, and had been licensed long enough, I really wanted to have the qualification to become a supervisor, and I did a supervisor training with I'll just say her name, Karen Hickson. I think she goes by Kay Hickson, and I think she goes by they them. But
of course,
yeah.
Of course.
But
she's not like the other girls. She's a they them.
Yeah, I mean, proud member of the queer community, as she would say, and and I remember being so impressed with her as a teacher in the past because she was so good at sounding so woke. Back when I looked up to that, I remember how she modeled having conversations about power and privilege, and I was like, I want to be that smooth when I talk about power and privilege. I remember being a little baby a few years ago. Yeah, so but what I will say, when you say it's good that the support went first, I do agree in the sense that the people who went up in support, they warned the representatives. They said, you're going to hear testimony from ex-gays who say that Jesus saved them. That's what they said we were going to say. And I don't think any of them expected that there was going to be a licensed therapist coming up and saying and I specifically said pro-gay things that they were not expecting to hear, because everyone else made the mistake of lumping sexual orientation and gender identity together. How did we get on this thread? I don't know if I finished answering any of your questions.
Oh, well, it's all very informative. I just want to say, hey, deprogrammer, who is Kay Yang, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. I hope you're feeling good, and happy International Women's Day. And thank you to everyone who is watching so far. But Kay Yang is my special friend, so I thank her for being here. Yeah, you were going to tell us a little bit about the bill, but I think this is really good because I'm looking at the comments and people are very interested in testifying. And I think this is really good to tell people, because testifying ultimately is quite easy, and you can testify in most states. You can testify from out of state, and you can do this over Zoom. And there's actually, I'll try to find it and I'll put it up in the show notes later. I'm not going to search for it. But there's a TRA site that they track bills that are coming up. So they're actually the best.
They're doing the work for us?
They're doing the work for us because they track all these bills, positive and negative, and they have a list of them. So I'll put it up because if you look at this list, you can see bills that are coming up, and then you can testify yourself. So it's actually this great resource, and it's very easy because most of these you can do from Zoom. There are some that you have to go in person, but also you can write written testimony. If you don't feel like speaking in public, you can do written testimony. And I think I'm glad you went in person because there is an impact with the legislature, with the representatives of being in person. I think that's a powerful impact. However, the more people that testify, the better. So I've absolutely testified for home, especially when I'm testifying because I'm on the West Coast. When I'm testifying on the East Coast, sometimes, as you said, there's multiple bills on the table. It can last hours, and you want to be able to sit in your comfy chair while you are waiting for your bill to come up.
Yeah, and so
but
for
tell
this,
us, go with this thought and tell us about the bill that you were testifying for.
so for this bill, there were like 500 testimonies submitted in writing, and I think like 300 in support, 175 in opposition, something like that was the numbers in the end. And I do want to say, from reading a lot of those, if anyone is thinking about submitting written testimony in the future, what I have observed is helpful and not. So definitely read the bill before you submit testimony. There were some testimonies written in opposition from people who clearly did not know. Okay, here's what's not helpful. I oppose this bill. Send. Like, I'm sorry, you gotta do more than that. Like, okay, noted, you oppose this bill. Why? And then there were people who are so passionate about this issue, and God bless them, but because of their passionate involvement in this issue, they wrote about it as if we were talking about children, when actually, if you read what this bill said, what this bill was proposing was that we amend the existing statute. The existing statute was a ban against so-called misnamed conversion therapy for minors, and the proposed legislation only sought to remove the part saying that it was for minors so that it extended it to all people of all ages. That's what we were fighting. And I kept trying, I was in a panic that whole week leading up to the testimony because I was worried that we weren't going to have enough people on our side. And so I was really trying to rally people to submit testimony. And I really wanted people to understand the point I was trying to make is that our legislators don't understand that there's a difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, big differences. And they don't understand what this conversion therapy means as it's currently defined. And there was all this conflation going on from all the activists in the room who are in support of this bill, talking as if sexual orientation and gender identity are the same thing when they're not, and talking as if the horrific things that happened in the last century, like Nazi human experimentation and aversive conditioning, where they tried to make gay men watch gay porn while being shocked and electrocuted and taking nausea-inducing drugs and vomiting. That is obviously abusive. Obviously. Yeah. And nobody's doing that, especially a licensed therapist. If a licensed therapist did that and it was about anything, it doesn't matter if it's about being gay. It could be about brushing your teeth. I don't care. If a therapist is going to do that to a person, they deserve to have their license taken away. I think we can all agree on that. But these activists were conflating conversion therapy abuses of the last century with the ability of a therapist to question the so-called gender identity and to provide non-invasive, non-medical treatments for gender dysphoria that can result in somebody becoming comfortable with their body. So my whole rallying call was we need to help the legislators understand why we oppose this bill, because it's not just, Christian ex-gays. And unfortunately, we did some of the people who testified were Christian ex-gays, and that just confirmed the existing belief of the
Yeah.
Democratic representatives there who thought that that was what the opposition would entail.
Yeah, this is another good tip what Stephanie is saying here, because really, if anyone does testify, whether in person or on Zoom or writing testimony, we always want to think about countering the narrative that they are trying to tell about us. So, for example, when I went to Texas to testify on a sports bill, I was actually hosted by a right-wing group, but they were very excited to have me because I'm a registered Democrat. And so it was a big thing in Texas for me to lead with that. So I led my testimony by saying, my name is Amy Sousa, I'm a registered Democrat, before I got to my topic, because that countered the narrative that the opposition was trying to tell. And if you happen to be, right wing, is fine. I mean, obviously we are hands across the aisles on this issue. However, it's useful as much as possible to counter that narrative, because I also notice when I've seen school board meetings, when I've seen, city council meetings, and when I've seen all even state legislature testimony, a lot of people might pray or bring up God. And it's not that I don't think their religion is very important and affirming to them. But I have told people privately, like, this, unfortunately, in this scenario, they have stopped listening to you once you do that. And I don't think that's right. I think your opinion should be heard no matter what. But it is the unfortunate situation that just tunes out the legislatures. They've stopped listening at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So tell us about some of the things that you are doing now. Now, I know you of course are doing some publicity for this film, but you also have your own podcast. And I also wanted to ask you a little bit, I know you've taken a pause on this, but you were doing some work with detransitioners, because, obviously we heard some of your story before. Your work has really changed, and maybe we want to go to that, because you were telling your story, but you didn't sort of maybe get to that turnaround point. What was the wake up? What was the turnaround moment?
I think as I was working with these young people, there were definitely doubts in the back of my mind about, like, is this really gonna help? Is this really something they're gonna feel good about long term? But I'd never heard of detransitioners before until I heard about them. And the context in which I first heard about them was when I heard that activists are trying to stop 60 Minutes from doing their special on detransitioners. So I learned that their voices were being suppressed, and that immediately sparked my curiosity. And it's just shocking to me that there are people who could learn the same thing I learned. Oh, there's this group called detransitioners, and trans rights activists don't want you to hear what they have to say. That there are people who would hear that and be like, oh, then we should definitely silence them. Yeah, I don't want to know what they have to say if the trans rights activists must be right. Like, who does that? I don't know. For me, I'm like, wait, there are people who regretted this and the activists don't want you to know about it? Well, that just makes me want to know everything I can. So I kind of did a deep dive into detransition in 2020 and was just like immersing myself in their stories, and learning everything I could about it. And I didn't know any other therapists talking about this issue. I did not discover, I was listening to a lot of podcasts, but I did not discover Gender a Wider Lens until I started my own podcast, actually. So I didn't have any community. And meanwhile, I was dealing with like such woke madness in the therapist communities that I was part of online. This is the pandemic, so I was very isolated, spending a lot of time online and a lot of time just like gardening and listening to podcasts. But I mean, I was part of this Facebook group for therapists, and it was one of the largest, if not the largest, group of therapists in the United States on Facebook. And it was being taken over by these woke like wolves that would just pounce on anything. Like, the most absurd example I have of something like this is that one day I asked, after I'd already been conditioned not to say certain things in that group, I just thought this was innocent enough. I asked how unprofessional people thought it was if I came to a session with wet hair. Well, I said for a therapist to come to a session with wet hair. Why? Because I'm not good at time management, and sometimes I'm like rushing to get ready for a session. And I don't dry my hair, and I wanted to know what people thought about that. And I got schooled on the white supremacy of my question, because I know
What?
I apparently know very little about
Ay,
ethnic
ay.
hair textures, and that's an indicator of my racism. Yeah, it was just like absurd. But
it is the hair that you have.
yeah, I'm like, I'm talking about me, people. I'm sorry. It's about me. Look, this is what I got.
It is the hair that you have, and you can't change it.
Like, yeah. I'm sorry, I did not word my question inclusively enough. If I am a white woman with long, straight hair, how unprofessional is it for, like, I'm sorry.
I see, because your question was like, if one. Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah. There was my fatal flaw, right? Yeah. There's a lot of that kind of nonsense, a lot of pile-ons. And I was not even on Twitter at the time. I actually joined Twitter to find like-minded people, and that's been great. I mean, it's had its moments, but
that's how we met.
That's how we met. Yeah, that's how I met a lot of great people. But so 2020, doing a deep dive and a lot of watching and listening, and sort of sitting back and watching, like, I want to join the conversation. And so then I started planning my podcast, and I wasn't planning my podcast to be so focused on gender as it has been, but that, I was also blogging at the time, and that's where I just noticed, like, people really care about this issue. And when I started hearing from the parents who were desperate to hear more people like me speaking out, there's just been a lot of momentum around that. That's what people want to talk about. And I've gotten a lot stronger and a lot clearer with the issue. So, so now, now I work with detransitioners and parents, and I still have, I have clients who have nothing to do with any of this. I have clients who have no idea that I am a public figure, that I have a podcast. Increasingly, I'm thinking of warning new people, like, you should know I am a public figure, because it might be jarring to be, 6 months into therapy and then one day just like discover your therapist on TV or something. Like, that could maybe cause a rift. So I think at this point I should warn people, but I have plenty of, I have a diverse practice. I also keep it pretty small because I spend a lot of time doing other things. Podcasting and working with Affirmation Generation has been really wonderful. I'm getting to talk to all kinds of people about the film. Sometimes I even get to travel to promote the film.
I want to ask you, I don't know, maybe it's not controversial. I think it might be semi-controversial, because this is, I want to ask kind of a twofold question about the mental health industry and profession, and the DSM specifically. To me, my opinion, this is my opinion, the DSM is a very political document. A lot of the current diagnostics in there are influenced by a political agenda. I even would say, I would say, as sort of a neutral one to bring up, PTSD, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder. This, but maybe the audience won't, but it was coined for war veterans specifically. And to me, for example, that is political in the sense that to experience stress post trauma, to me, is a natural response. So to term it a disorder is political to me, and I think that it takes the onus off of the military and what the military is doing to vets, and puts the responsibility. It creates the responsibility within the patient, within the client, and what they're going through. So it makes it their internal problem rather than a response of something that they've been put through. And for me, I have a really similar feeling about gender dysphoria, because it acts like it's an internal, just sort of some natural internal thing that is going wrong within a person, rather than it being something external in the culture that the patient is reacting to. So that's the one part. And two, I am I don't know if you've gone there in your thought, but I have a problem with that term in general because the way it is explained in the DSM includes the term gender identity. So I don't like it as a diagnosis at all because the diagnosis is an incongruence with gender identity and sex. So it makes an assumption about gender identity already. So I find it to be a very political term, and I find it to be a really problematic term. And I am wondering if you would be willing to share your thoughts on that.
Oh, there's so many directions we could go from here, Amy. Yeah, you're right. It's a political document, and it serves a few purposes. And one of the most pragmatic purposes that it serves is determining what conditions are covered under insurance. And that, like, if you, and this presents a major ethical dilemma because I think most people would agree that therapy being affordable to the average person is a good thing, right? And so insurance paying for therapy is the most common way by which therapy is affordable to patients while still being able to provide living wages or good quality of life for therapists. And so in order to work with insurance, though, we have to follow the medical model. And with the medical model, there's a diagnosis, a billable code for that diagnosis, there's a treatment plan, there's an assessment that matches the diagnosis, and then the treatment plan proposes what services are going to help treat that diagnosis. Now, I have a lot to say about how we're currently designing treatment plans for so-called gender dysphoria, but, you know, it's like, here's the thing. The DSM as a political document allows us to describe the symptom cluster that most closely approximates the nature of the client's distress so that we can justify coverage for working with that distress. And that has its pros and cons. It's kind of like, once I went to a chiropractor following an accident. I had whiplash, and the chiropractor was working with my whole spine. So sometimes I would need an adjustment in my hips. But the chiropractor was explaining to me that because my auto insurance was covering treatment for my whiplash, that if he worked on my pelvis, that was like not covered, which is ridiculous because your spine is all one thing. Like, if your neck is out of whack, then there's probably a connection to your hip. Like, your hips are going to twist the other way. Like, it's all connected, right? Sometimes you have to work over here in order to get to over there. But it's kind of, you know, the medical model breaks people into bits and pieces and compartmentalizes everything. And so, you know, with therapy, it's like, I feel like when I've tried to work within the medical model, sometimes I feel like I'm that chiropractor where I'm like, I have to think about how I'm going to word this in the documentation so that I'm making it clear to somebody who's not psychologically minded that's reading this, how us talking about this thing or working in this way is going to help you with this other thing over here that to someone else doesn't seem connected, but to us it totally is. That's what I don't like about the medical model, right? But at the same time, I like people being able to use their insurance. But at the same time, insurance doesn't pay me enough, so I'm pulling out of all my insurance contracts one by one, from the lowest paying to the highest over time, because I want a decent quality of life, and I do a lot of work for free. So the paid therapy sessions kind of have to make up for all the free work I do. So it's really a double-edged sword. Like, we have to work with the medical model to get the insurance to pay for it, but then, and I don't think there's anything wrong in theory with kind of the general concept that we're describing a symptom cluster that the patient wants help with. And it's good to want help for something. It's good to be able to put your finger on something and say, you know, I really don't feel like myself lately. These mood swings or these anxiety spells are really getting to me. And we give people a language for that. It's not perfect. But yeah, I mean, if you look back in time, there was a time when homosexuality was in the DSM, right? Because it was pathologized at the time. So that makes it very clear that it's a reflection of the culture. And I remember when I was in grad school and we were studying the DSM, in the DSM-4, which we were studying at the time, because that was right before the DSM-5 came out, I remember reviewing the section that talked about how psychic phenomenon are described in different cultures that we don't have in our culture. And so, like, there was one, for instance, and I can't remember what tribe, where in the world this was a thing in, but in one culture, it was common for men to have an intense fear that their, like, testicles would shrivel into their body or something, something creepy like that. And they had, like, a word for it.
Okay.
And it was like a diagnosis to them, right? And there's all these weird fears and neuroses that people have in these other cultures that to us they seem strange, but they're normal in that culture. And it's like, we could learn a thing or two from looking at that. Like, if in a certain culture a certain idea becomes very contagious, and suddenly everyone has the same weird neurosis, like, could some of what's going on in our Western culture be like that too? And that's exactly what I think about gender dysphoria. I think it's honestly a very problematic diagnosis, because it's basically someone saying that they don't feel comfortable with stereotypes, like, and that's obviously going to be very culturally mediated. You can't separate that from the environment. I think traditionally, a girl who is uncomfortable being a girl says she's a boy, or vice versa. Like, you would have to look at what is that family environment or that school environment teaching this young person about what it means to be male or female, because obviously that's going to play a role in the young person's discomfort. And that was all, like, before we're dealing with the social influence now, where it's obviously a trendy thing. And so the real diagnosis, I don't think gender dysphoria is at the core. I think the real diagnosis is, normal teenage adjustment, wanting to fit in, or it's autism, or it's OCD. There's a lot of obsessive compulsive traits. And so if we could just throw out the whole DSM, like, just imagine a world in which insurance is not involved and money is not an issue, and we're just thinking holistically about the patients and families that we see. Someone, and we don't use any of these terms, someone comes feeling distress about this gender issue, one way to think about that is that the sex of their body is the scapegoat. And we think about the family dynamics. My last episode of You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist that just came out, episode 47 with Bob Withers, I called it The Scapegoated Body, Transition, Regret, and Psychotherapy. Bob Withers has been working with detransitioners since I was a child, so it was really great to have him on the show. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I'm going to have to go watch that.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I love...
Go ahead.
Well, sorry. I love what you said about the different cultures, and it reminded me when I read Gina Rapon's book, The Myth of the Gendered Brain. She's a neuroscientist, and she was talking about even things like our PMS symptoms. So here we say that we have cramps and that we have mood swings, and that's a very sort of Western response to PMS. And she was saying that, again, and this is because it's all about the neuroplasticity of brains. So she was saying it's influenced by, like, the cultural programming that we have around what your symptoms are going to be. So those are the symptoms that you experience. And she was saying, whereas, like, in China, those are not the symptoms that are, like, culturally coded. So they don't have those symptoms. So, like, the symptoms that they have, where it was like anger, something else. I wish I could remember it off the top of my head, but she's saying the symptomology of which we take for granted. And I have real pain, cramps, so I don't understand. But they don't have maybe it was that they didn't have the mood swings that we have. But it's just to say that these are very culturally coded. So if you're growing up in a culture that tells you you can expect to experience these symptoms, then your expectation is that those are the symptoms that I will experience, and then you do experience them.
Right. I mean, it's your language, right? It's like, and there's an interesting thing about Chinese culture. I've heard that they somaticize because the culture in general is not very friendly to talking about feelings. So I've heard that it's more kind of culturally sanctioned in China. Just speaking in broad strokes here, I don't know the details, but it's more culturally sanctioned to say I have this or that physical ailment, and other people kind of know that that's code for how you're feeling emotionally, but you don't talk about your emotions. And I think there's something to that too, because I'm working with a Chinese medicine practitioner right now. I'm getting acupuncture and herbs for some chronic conditions that I have. And there is something to kind of thinking in that mind body way, where whatever emotion you're feeling maybe does have a location or a sensation in the body. So it's not necessarily that it's just an emotionally repressive culture. But
Yeah,
it is,
absolutely.
you're making an important point about sort of terminology. And I think that's a big part of the problem of how we got here with the gender crisis, is that young people are looking for a language, a way of conceptualizing and expressing the distress that they feel. And the language that they're being given, increasingly you hear young people talk about my dysphoria. And what I've noticed from working with parents of trans-identified youth is that their youth can say my dysphoria this, my dysphoria that, and it could be triggered by anything, and very little of it actually has to do with the sex of their body. You know, it's like, it could be PMS actually, or it could be a bad grade, or it could be a falling out with a friend, or a political difference with a classmate, right? That like any stressful life situation then gets coded and interpreted as having something to do with their body, and the body becomes the scapegoat for their distress.
Yeah, I think that is so true. I mean, this goes very much into where my field of psychology, into depth psychology, because there's so much somatic work that is done in that part of the field. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that we see this in the past. I don't know. Did you ever read the book Mary Piper, Reviving Ophelia? It's a
Oh
great
no,
book.
but that was out when I was a troubled teen, and my mom read it because she was looking for
Yeah.
help about me.
It's a fantastic book, and I think it's still very relevant today. And I think that if she wrote it to, well, actually, she did a revise, and anyway, I don't want to talk about that. She did a new edition that I did not like with her daughter, but I think if she stuck to her material and her original analysis instead of going a little woke, the symptomology that we see around gender dysphoria would be included, because it was talking about what the stress and the trauma that young girls have going from pre-puberty into puberty, and basically saying, you're observing these 9, 10, 11-year-olds who are fierce, who are fearless, who get into it with the boys, and then go into their puberty and become insecure, uncomfortable. And so she was talking about the symptoms of anorexia, bulimia, cutting, and all of these being responses that were, partially culturally created, because they're what the other girls are doing, one, and two, as a means of controlling the body, and two, also a means of externally expressing the internal trauma. So you're having distress because you are uncomfortable with the sexual advances you're getting, or you are uncomfortable with the projections, these kinds of projections of objectification onto your body, or adult sexuality, or the being a certain body type, needing to be a certain body type and wanting that. So that these symptoms are expressing the pain that you can't verbalize, and I think that is very, I mean, there's a lot of things involved, but that is one of the things that is involved, and I think that is very transferable to this. It's that the language that you have, like cutting, was the language that those 90s girls had to express this pain that they saw everyone else doing. So this language that we see of kids cutting their bodies in this new way, this is the language language they have, in a sense, to express this pain. It's the cultural language that they've been given.
Yeah, well said.
Oh, well, let's see. Where do we want to go? We've been here an hour. I want to ask you, I guess, what are you excited about right now? What is giving you hope, and what is feeding your work? And maybe what are your hopes for what you wish to see?
Well, okay, so for one, I'm excited about T-Trans Awareness Day this weekend. It is, as far as I'm aware, it's the first time that Portland is acknowledging T-Trans Awareness Day, and
Wow.
and it's my baby. I started it. So that's, that's something to be proud of. And I have some great help, and it's exciting to see the momentum building and the friends that have stepped up to help with this, and their interest and the connections that they're forming with each other. And I doubt the friends that I'm talking about are watching this, but if you are, I'm going to give you a wink, because you know what I'm talking about. The personal connections that some of you are making with each other. No, it's been great to see, and we have over 60 people registered for that event now. So
That's
to see Portland stepping up. I mean, Portland is in shambles right now. It is a disaster, but I'm kind of stuck here, at least for the next decade, because we have an 8-year-old, my stepson, my younger one. As broken and messy as Portland is, with all the trans identified people here, we're also going to have a lot of detransitioners that just do the math, right? So, I'm excited about being part of creating that infrastructure for the support services they're going to need. So that's one thing. I'm excited to travel to Texas in April, finally get to meet you in person, and
I'm so excited.
I'm
so excited.
I'm not ready to say too much about this publicly yet, but I'll just go ahead and say I'm going to Costa Rica this summer to study psychedelic assisted therapy, and to meet with a certain detransitioner who I think is fascinating, who is in Costa Rica. And so as soon as I have more clarity about that, I might start putting the word out there about fundraising efforts, because I have big plans, big hopes for what I would like to accomplish in Costa Rica. I'd like to do some filming for a sequel to Affirmation Generation.
Great.
And so I might I'm also excited. I just met a new assistant, and I've been through a lot of assistants over the past year who have all flaked out at the first sign of stress. But this new one was in the military. She's a tough lady. She's worked for lawyers. I'm sure she has a thick enough skin and she's so sharp. So I'm hopeful that this new assistant will work out.
Great.
And she's a very strategic thinker. And I tell her my ideas, and she can bounce ideas back off with me, and she can figure out how to structure things. So with her help, hopefully I'll set up some I don't know, fundraiser live streams where you pay to ask a question or something like that. We don't have a plan yet, but definitely be on the lookout for that. Those are the major things going on right now. You had asked earlier about the book that I started working on with the detransitioner letter exchange, and I honestly just got so busy reacting to things in the moment, so many messages coming in, and conversations that writing requires depth that I don't have in my life right now, and I'm kind of sad about that.
That's okay.
But I'm excited to be working with the momentum that we do have.
Well, writing projects keep, that doesn't, it's work that's completed, in a sense, and it's there when you're ready to go back to it. But it sounds like there's so many great things on the horizon. So that is just so wonderful. And yeah, I'm absolutely excited to meet you in Texas. And for everyone, it's going to be on April 20th and 21st. There's going to be a panel event on the 20th, a rally and a film screening on the 21st in Austin. It's really going to be a very good time. It's going to be a meet and greet, and a lot of really amazing people are going to be there. Stephanie, as you know, will be there. I will be there. Kay Yang will be there. Jennifer Lal will be there. Miriam Grossman will be there. Alex Aaron is coming out from Israel. She will be there. Brandon Showalter will be there. So a lot of great people will be there. So I
can't believe it's just that one night with your panel event, and then just for me the film screening we're doing the next day. I feel like we need like a whole retreat. I know. I have a friend who's working very early stages with a startup that he's designing an app that allows you to coordinate travel plans with your friends, and I was like, when he described it to me, I was like, I need that, because I've met so many amazing people around the world through doing this work, and if we could all just kind of input our criteria, like budget and timeline and preferred activities, and just like find an easy way to meet up, that would be amazing.
I love it. Well, I do. I wish we could do more meetups as well. I think, I know that all of us who are here, that's one of the reasons that we come to these online events. And that is one of the reasons, that it's so nice. I didn't interact with everyone quite as much as I do on the more boots on the ground live streams, but I do really love it. I love seeing your comments in the moment. I love being participatory. I do think these are community events, and I think it's so isolating not being in the dominant culture, and that it is very important for us all to do things like this and to have community. And I so appreciate your work, Stephanie, and I so appreciate your voice on this issue. It's just been amazing to see you. I think we met probably in 2021, or late or early, very early 2022.
I joined Twitter in September 2021. I feel like I met you within my first 3 months of joining.
Yeah,
so I was spending a lot of time in spaces.
That's what I think too. And just, your growth and your voice on this issue has just been exponential. So I feel like I've seen you solidly put in the work, and it's really paying off. And I think that I see your passion too, and your realness. So that's also just, it's a great value to me. You have a lot of integrity, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Likewise.
Yay. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and please like and subscribe and share. All of Stephanie's information is in the show notes right now. So her website, her YouTube, her Twitter, her Instagram, all of that information is in the show notes.
Is Affirmation Generation in there too?
Affirmation Generation is in the show notes. Affirmation Generation's Twitter page is in the show notes. Awesome. The show notes also includes a link to sign up for the April event if you want to do that. And then I think most of you know my info, but it's in the show notes too. All right.
Perfect. And you can watch Affirmation Generation now, people. You can go to our website anytime, stream it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, friends, for being here. Thanks, Pinwheel and Jamie and Lindsay and Tanya and Spirit Matter and Elusive and AS and Dana and Alma, I see, and Nathan. Who did I miss? Anyone? Mary Dwyer and Mary Ross and Jamie, Generation Y. And you've got Turf Mail was here very early on. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight, and I'll see you all very soon. Good night.
Night.